We hear about climate change all the time, right? But you ever wonder, behind all the headlines and the noise, is there an actual coordinated global plan to deal with it? Well, today, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. We're going to look at how the world really intends to cool our planet. You know, you see these summits on the news, you hear about agreements and targets. It can feel like a lot of disconnected pieces. But does it all add up to a single, coherent plan? That's the big question we're diving into today. Okay, so before we can even begin to understand the solution, we have to be absolutely crystal clear on the problem itself. So let's kick things off with our first big question. Where are we right now? At the very heart of this whole story is the greenhouse effect. And, it's a totally natural and essential process. Think of it like a cozy blanket for the Earth, trapping just enough of the sun's heat to keep the planet livable. The problem isn't the blanket itself. It's that human activity has been making that blanket thicker and thicker. So here's a quick and simple breakdown of how that works. First, sunlight streams in and warms up the Earth. Simple enough. Then the Earth radiates that warmth back out as heat. But, and this is the key part, some of those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere trap a portion of that outgoing heat. That's what's thickening our planetary blanket and cranking up the temperature. Now, here's where things get really interesting, because there's actually another opposing force at play, global dimming. While greenhouse gases are trapping heat, other pollutants, things like soot and dust, are actually reflecting some sunlight back into space, which creates a slight cooling effect. The big worry for scientists is that as we get better at cleaning up our air, we might actually unmask the full extent of the warming that's been sort of hidden by this dimming effect. It's also super important to understand that not all greenhouse gases are created equal, not even close. So to compare them, scientists use a metric called global warming potential, or GWP for short. It's basically a scale where carbon dioxide is set as the baseline, it gets a score of 1, and every other gas is then measured against it. And this table right here shows why that GWP matters so much. Methane, which comes from sources like livestock, is way more potent at trapping heat than CO2. And then you have HFCs, which are used in things like refrigerators. They are incredibly powerful. This is exactly why climate action isn't just about CO2. It's about tackling this whole portfolio of different gases. So that's where we are, a planet that's warming up because of a mix of these potent gases. So let's move on to the second big question, which builds right on top of this. Where do we, as a global community, want to go? This number. This is the North Star for all global climate action, 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Paris Agreement officially commits the world to limiting the global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees, but to actively pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5. And that single number drives policy, technology, and diplomacy all around the world. It's a huge deal. Now, getting to this goal wasn't some overnight decision. The journey really started decades ago. You had the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, which was a critical first step, but it mostly focused on developed nations. The real game changer was the 2015 Paris Agreement, because for the very first time, it brought all nations into a common cause. And then in 2023, we saw the first ever global stocktake to check in and see how we're all doing together. Which, of course, brings us to our final and maybe most important question. We know where we are, and we know where we want to go. So, how do we get there? What is the actual playbook? And believe it or not, the way we've structured this entire explainer is borrowed directly from the global climate negotiation process itself. It's called the Talanoa Dialogue, and it's a process used to guide conversations by asking these three simple but really powerful questions. It's all about taking stock of our collective efforts in a way that's inclusive and transparent. Pretty cool, huh? So the engine room of the Paris Agreement is this 5-year cycle. Here's how it works. Every country submits its own national plan. They're called NDCs. Then they go and implement it. After that, every 5 years, we have that global stocktake to check our collective progress. But here's the key. Step 4. Based on that stocktake, countries are expected to come back with even stronger plans. It's what they call a ratcheting mechanism, and it's designed to keep increasing ambition over time. That global framework is great, but what does it actually look like on the ground? Let's zoom in on a case study from India to see how one of these national plans is actually put into action. So, what does a plan like this actually look like? Well, India, for example, has committed to 3 huge goals. First, to grow its economy without proportionally growing its emissions. In other words, becoming way more efficient.
Second, a massive push to generate almost half its electricity from clean, non-fossil fuel sources. And third, to expand its forests so they can act like a giant carbon sponge, soaking up emissions.
Now, to hit those big targets, India launched a super detailed national action plan with 8 core missions. The first 4 you see here are just enormous undertakings. There's a national solar mission aiming to make India a world leader in solar, a mission for energy efficiency to help industries use less power, one for sustainable habitats to design smarter, greener cities, and a national water mission to conserve this vital resource as the climate changes. And the plan continues with the final 4 missions. These are focused on protecting the fragile Himalayan ecosystem, which is a critical water source for the whole region, a Green India mission to aggressively expand forests, a sustainable agriculture mission to help millions of farmers adapt, and finally, a mission on strategic knowledge to fund the research to make sure all these efforts are actually working. I mean, it is a truly comprehensive approach. All right, so let's take a step back and tie all these pieces together, from the global science all the way down to these specific national action plans.
So, is there a global plan? Yeah, there is. It's a roadmap built on those 3 key questions. We know where we are, a warming planet. We know our destination, that 1.5-degree goal. And we know the route, this repeating cycle where every country contributes and we all check in together to keep ramping up our efforts. So, the plan exists, the mechanisms are in place, and nations really are taking action. But the ultimate question, it still hangs in the air. The roadmap is clear, but whether our collective speed and ambition will be enough to get us to our destination in time, well, that's the story that is still being written.